Hello, my name is C.J. Levick, and what you're about to watch is one of the most amazing revelations I have ever had the privilege of publishing. If you find this video interesting, I would suggest you watch the full disclosure of this prophetic perspective in the video I just published titled, What Are the Odds? I hope this is a blessing, as I have some very good news for the small remnant of Christians that believe in the pre-tribulation view of the end times. So a short summary is in order to bring us up to date regarding the prophecy given to Daniel that he was told he could not fully understand and would not understand in his lifetime, as the secrets would be disclosed at the appointed time that was revealed in Daniel 12, 1 through 4, where we discover the exact period of time described so accurately that we cannot miss the fact that, starting in 1948 with the rebirth of Israel, and there's not much time left, as it is now 77 years from the start point that I believe will start the time of Jacob's trouble, that will last 2,520 days, or exactly 7 years, ending on the 84th year that just happens to be exactly 7 years from right now. So let's begin by looking at what Daniel might have understood as he was given one period of time that he was told needed to be divided, segregated, and determined. In other words, after the first two collection of 10 sevens were multiplied together, Shaboam, accounting for 4,900 years, they were to be divided into 100 periods of 49. From that, we are to calculate that this collection of 100 Jubilee announcements are then to be segregated, which means taking a smaller number out of a bigger number. And finally, we are to understand that the Lord has determined these appointed time periods, and it's our job to discover the start dates from which they are to be calculated based on the clues provided in Daniel 9:24, understanding that what we will discover is prophetically significant Jubilee cycles that mark out appointed times that are connected to Israel and, as we will discover, the children of promise who belong to Israel, the nation, are also the children of Abraham by faith who have been grafted into spiritual Israel. The Lord then reveals two start dates that Daniel might have been able to determine. Those two start dates could only be dates that preceded the year 539 BC, which is the year that Daniel was given the prophetic vision, coincidental to the completion of the 70 years of captivity in Babylon, that was ended by Cyrus the Great in the year 539 BC. The two dates both had to do with the fulfillment of major prophetic promises made to Israel. Israel's birth as a nation in 1848 while in bondage to Egypt, and the crossing over the Jordan River into the Promised Land that was announced by the 9th Jubilee between 1848 BC and 1407 BC that announced the Jubilee that took place in 1406 BC. From those two starting dates and the contextual details that the Lord added in Daniel 9:24, Daniel could determine the following. With the 1848 BC start date, Daniel could have gone forward 100 Jubilees. That takes you to 3053 AD. Now, probably at this point, Daniel realized that he was, as they say, out of his depth, as the number and time period was beyond his imagination, and it was doubtful he could have identified the dates. And without knowing that 1848 was not only the start date, but the 44th Jubilee from creation, he would have been bewildered by this revelation. But based on looking back in time, if he had had the information that is at our fingertips in 2025 AD, I have no doubt that Daniel would have realized what I realized the first time I read this original prophecy in Hebrew. The Lord just revealed to Daniel the entire creation to new creation, 1008 sabbatical cycles, and the 144 Jubilee cycles that are displayed on the graph below. We can then add the second start date, which the Lord identifies as a start point for counting a new Jubilee that began with creation, and it's very doubtful Israel understood that 1406 BC fulfilled the 53rd Jubilee from creation, announced in 1407 BC, that the Lord told Israel to begin counting as if it were the first Jubilee that would begin for Israel in 1406 BC. Two quick reviews before I begin. The first is a reminder that it was the Lord that revealed that Daniel's vision would and could not be understood until the end. And it was also the word of the Lord that revealed in Daniel 12, 1-4, that the end the Lord had in mind began with the regathering of Israel that happened on May 14, 1948. This is the start date for the second announcement of Messiah's mission on the earth that would happen after the time of Jacob's trouble, that ends with the second coming of Messiah to rescue a remnant of believing Israel at the end. The time of Jacob's trouble began when Jacob was 77 years old. Not long after the time of Jacob's trouble ended, the Lord would change his name to Israel. Having worked 7 years for the love of his life, Rachel, and expecting to marry her, he was tricked by his uncle and soon-to-be father-in-law Laban into marrying Rachel's older sister Leah, and ended up working another 7 years of bondage to pay the bride's price for Rachel. 77 plus 7 equals 84. Besides 84 being the age of Jacob when he finished paying the bride's price twice, it is a very significant prophetic number. Here are some examples of how the Lord has revealed the number 84. The number of days in a year from the beginning was 360 days in 1 year, divided by 12 equals 30. 30 times 7 years equals 84. 12 months times 7 years equals 84, the number of months in the 25-20 7 years of Jacob's trouble. 84 times 84 equals 7,056, the number of years on the Lord's Jubilee calendar. Daniel was about 84 years old when he presented Cyrus the Great with the prophecy found in Isaiah 45 that was a letter from the Lord to Cyrus. Between the year 539 BC, when Cyrus the Great decreed that the Jews could return to Jerusalem, and the 455 BC decree proclaimed by Artaxerxes, is a time period of exactly 84 years. A decree revealed to Daniel, who died at least 70 years before this decree actually happened. 84 years from the start date of 1948 AD, when Israel was reborn as a nation in one day, signals the end of Jacob's trouble, when Israel will witness the second coming of Messiah and enter into his millennial kingdom. These are just a few examples of how prominent the number 84 is in Scripture. About 6 weeks ago, I decided to go through the Shabom 100 Jubilee Revelation and discovered that there was a 49-year Jubilee cycle between the decree of Artaxerxes in 455 BC and 1948 AD. Starting with 455 BC and going forward, 49 Jubilees, or 2,401 years, amazingly takes you to 1947 AD, and that date announces the 49th Jubilee that actually took place in the middle of 1948 AD. The 455 start date for the Artaxerxes decree is announcing 2 periods of time that announce the first and the second coming of Messiah. Obviously, the first one announces the Messiah coming as a suffering Savior. The second announces the Messiah coming as the conquering King. And we now have another reason for understanding why the Lord told Daniel to go his way, as the prophecy would only be fully unveiled, but not until the end. And what end is forecast in Daniel 12, 1-4? The answer is simple. It's the return of the Jews to Israel that took place in 1948 AD. A historical date we now know was prophesied based on a 49-year jubilee we determined and segregated from the Shabom 70 times 70, or 100 Jubilee bank that started with the decree of Artaxerxes that is now proven beyond any shadow of a doubt to have taken place in 455 BC. I have a question. Where in Daniel is the decree that announces the 1948 AD birth of Israel? The answer: it's been bundled and hidden up until now in the first decree. Listen to what it says in Daniel 9:25. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Now, untangling this in the original Hebrew is pretty straightforward and simple, but it's a lot more difficult to explain in English. The first decree announced in Daniel in the original Hebrew is Mem Tsadi Aleph. I'll pronounce it wrong, but it sounds like matzah. that is translated in the literal Hebrew as faring forth. So matzah means the publication by an authoritative person, such as a governor or a king, by speaking it or writing it on an official document. Faring forth. The second decree is simply declared in the original Hebrew with the dalet bet resh, dibur. Dibur means word, followed by the Hebrew word that means restored or returned, la hashib. The Hebrew word dibur, dalet bet resh, followed by the Hebrew word la hashib, which is lamed, hey, sheen, yod, bet, is a beautiful picture of shepherding the flock back home. So literally translated, we have the Word, who is the Lord, restoring Israel. Dibur la hashib. The Word, who is the Lord, restoring Israel. Every time you read the word of the Lord in the ancient Hebrew text, it is dibur yod-he vav-he. Translated literally, it means word yod-he vav-he, or word Lord. In the Greek, it's equivalent to logos. As we have declared in this video, in John 1 reveals that the word or logos is the Son of God. The Bible translators in the 17th century could not have had a clue what this meant because the idea that Israel was going to become a nation again was not consistent with their eschatology, and obviously it had not happened. This could only be translated correctly after the rebirth of Israel that happened in 1948 AD, as the Lord told Daniel it could only be unveiled at the end. Now we have located the second decree that gives a destination and a time period of 2,401 years that was revealed as 49 jubilees in the bank of Sheboam that reveals 100 jubilees from which to determine which jubilee fits with each prophetic announcement in Daniel. But are we missing something? We have a start date of 49 jubilees that takes us to the miraculous restoration of Israel, just like the Lord, the Logos, the Word, announced in Daniel 9:25. We have an end date based on the 123rd Jubilee from creation date of 4004 that lands on the Jubilee that will end on September of this year, 2025. Confirmed by the Lord as on the same 123rd Jubilee cycle from creation, the Lord told Israel to begin counting again in 1406 BC, and so they did. The 70th Jubilee from when Israel crossed the Jordan. Let's look at Daniel 9:24 through 26 as a puzzle. So we ask, what pieces have already been fit together, and what pieces are left on the table? Obviously, the Lord is not going to be crucified twice, so all the puzzle pieces regarding the timing of the first announcement of the Messiah and his death can be ignored. The question is, what's left? You will find the answer to this question in the original Hebrew. The first puzzle piece is the time period of 490 years revealed as Sheboam Shabuah that follows the decree announcement. Sheboam Shabuah is 490 years. Now here is where it gets interesting, as Sheboam Shabuah as a prophetic motif can either be multiplied or it can be added together. Obviously, in the 17th century, looking back at the crucifixion that took place in the 1st century, 490 years from 455 BC, 490 years was the correct choice. We now have an amazing Jubilee announcement that forecasts that the word of the Lord to regather Israel has been fulfilled in 1948. It's in the history books. Should we add 490 years or 77 years to the start date of 1948? 70 times 7 is 490. 70 plus 7 is 77. Obviously, 77 years is the correct number. So we have one more puzzle to solve. Does the Lord give us any clue as to what is going to happen 77 years from when Israel was reborn as a nation in 1948 AD? The one remaining puzzle piece has been mistranslated twice. The puzzle piece shows up right after Daniel's forecast that Messiah is going to be killed. Some translators report after the death of Jesus, where it says, "and Messiah had nothing." Other translators sound great, as it basically says, "and Messiah died, but not for his own sins," which is true, of course. Unfortunately, neither of these translations are correct. Pattern is prophecy, and the first mention of this phrase is the first place we should look for a good exposition. So, can we find a match for the following Hebrew phrase we discover in Daniel 9:26? We discover the answer to Genesis 5:24 with the identical rendering in the original Hebrew that matches Daniel 9:26. Let's read what it says in Genesis 5:24. The English translation is, "Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him." This is the first mention of a miraculous event we would later call the rapture. This is what Genesis 5:24 looks like in the original Hebrew. The key word is aleph, yod, nun, ayin. It literally means vanished. It was translated as was not. So we have vav, which is and, aleph, yod, nun, ayin, which was translated was not, another vav, and nun, which means life, activity, or alive. In other words, listen to what it says in the expanded English. Enoch walked with God, and he was not. He vanished, and lived because God took him. Now let's look at Genesis 5:24. Again, literally says Enoch vanished alive. And vanished alive. You might also find it interesting that Enoch's name adds up to 20 plus 6 plus 50 plus 8, which equals 84. Now let's look at what Daniel 9:26 literally says. Messiah will be cut off. That happened in 31 AD. But listen what happens after that. And what follows Messiah, the report in Daniel that Messiah is cut off or killed, is this: a mystery that can be discovered in the Hebrew right after the Hebrew word and, or vav. And now look at how it should have been translated from the original Hebrew. Remember that Hebrew is a verb first and English is a noun first language. So instead of vanished redeemed, in English we would say redeemed vanished. Or in plain English, those redeemed by Messiah vanished. And when does this happen? Is the answer Shaboam Shabuah, 70 plus 7, which equals 77 years, from when Israel was reborn as a nation in 1948 AD? Well, we won't have to wait to find out. And when can we expect this to take place? It sure seems like Daniel's prophecy is pointing to 2025 AD, as that sure seems like the appointed time that many believed was the Feast of Trumpets, that ended on either the 23rd or the 24th of September 2025 AD. Why didn't it happen? Why are we, who have trusted in Messiah, still here? 2025 AD was highlighted by so many prophetic spotlights and with so many evidences from the headlines coming from Israel. What happened? How did we miss something that seemed so obvious? The answer is surprisingly simple, and it will be my great pleasure to encourage you to hang on just a bit longer. I have produced a simple chart that will help you understand the why of this video that's been over a month in the planning and production, as I was persuaded based on 15 years of studying all the calendars connected with the forecast to the day of Jacob's trouble that was approaching like an oncoming freight train. It's true, I knew something was amiss, something wasn't fitting, and that something is the corrected calendar. The question my ministry is famous for asking is, where are we on the Lord's prophetic calendar? And now I would like to bring some comfort and clarity to that question. Where are we on the Lord's prophetic calendar? That answer comes as a simple but obvious observation. Listen. The Julian calendar that is used to chronicle, based on the Julian scheme of measuring a year, with 3 years that are 365 days long, and the 4th year that is 366 days long, has a problem. In other words, a 365.25 day in a year calculation that was never correct and is off by 0.0078 days a year. The Gregorian calendar was changed at the direction of Pope Gregory, and the Catholic nations of the world started using this much more accurate calendar in the year 1582 AD. The Gregorian calendar was used by most of the rest of the world when Great Britain took the lead and legally established the Gregorian calendar in the year 1752, along with most of the rest of the world. The last holdout in Europe was Greece, that finally established the Gregorian calendar in 1923. Did the Gregorian calendar correct any dates prior to October of 1582? Did they correct the Julian calendar that was established as the world calendar in 46 BC? The answer is no. So whenever you are measuring time on a calendar that includes any dates prior to 1582, and you need to accurately measure a true time duration, you will need to subtract 0.0078 from every single year that happens in history before 1752 AD, when the world, for the most part, changed the calendar calculation based on the Gregorian calendar. And by the way, the 1752 date is the date used by all the online date duration calendars, so keep that in mind. And do not forget that the Lord has His own yearly calendar from creation that's perfect, and for at least 1,556 years, and it could have been longer, but from creation to the flood of Noah, this calendar kept perfect time. Add the reintroduction of the Lord's 360 days in a year calendar that I believe, based on the scriptures alone, will replace the current Gregorian calendar that is currently keeping us so close to the actual 365,242,199 days in a year. We cannot ever forget that God is precise, with an exactitude that is both frightening at times and also very comforting to His children. Some things are hard to unfold, too complicated, requiring too much intuition and knowledge to explain. But what I'm about to show is both knowable and can be easily calculated. So my job in the next few minutes is to show you how we got it wrong and how, consulting the Lord's Word, we can get it right. I believe that Yeshua is coming at His appointed time that will complete 5,993 years of the 7,000-year calendar that began in 3969 BC. Will the Lord work it out so the Hebrew calendar seamlessly fits into the Lord's tropical calendar that He established after the flood of Noah? I think He will. And now I have the privilege of publishing where we are on the Lord's calendar after all the corrections are both understood and applied. The 77 years between Tishri 1 that began the 77-year countdown to the great and terrible day of the Lord took place on the Gregorian calendar on October 4th, 1948. And this is where it gets interesting, as we need to remind ourselves that we are living in a period of time that began after the flood of Noah, who was a Gentile. Since the flood of Noah, going forward over 4,000 years to the year 1752 AD, we've all been doing our calendar calculations on the Julian calendar. Pope Gregory created a more accurate calendar in 1582. It became the official calendar of the Roman Catholic Church. In 1752 AD, 170 years later, it was adopted by most of the rest of the world. How did Pope Gregory adjust the calendar? It was simple. He simply removed 11 days from the calendar that went from October 5th, Thursday, 1582, to Friday, 1582, October 15th. So if it was your birthday any time between October 5th and the 15th, you were out of luck. No party, no presents, no cake. It all just disappeared. This was the solution to the overestimation of time based on the Julian calendar. How did Pope Gregory come up with 11 days? The Julian calendar was created in 46 BC. The number of years between 46 BC and 1582 AD is 1,624 years. And there's a difference between the Julian calendar and the Gregorian calendar and the most accurate astronomical solar calendar. Why is this important? The Julian calendar overreports 0.0078 days per year. In 1,000 years, it's overestimated the days in a year by almost 8 days, 7.8 days. The Gregorian calendar is much more accurate, as it overestimates the days in 1,000 years by less than 1 day. The astronomical topical calendar is as close as we will ever get to the Lord's tropical calendar. So what does this mean, and what does it have to do with 2025? In a nutshell, we have been using the more accurate Gregorian calendar since 1752 AD. Starting with the flood and going forward over 4,000 years adds 0.0078 of a day to each year that has never been corrected, as the Gregorian calendar only corrected the calendar going forward from 1582 AD. And unfortunately, the world used the Julian calendar until 1752 AD. There are over 4,100 years between the flood of Noah and 1752 AD, when Great Britain and most of the rest of the Western world began using the Gregorian calendar. The bottom line is this: in order to accurately and precisely calculate where we are in 2025 AD, we would need to remove 32 days from the Julian calendar, starting with the flood of Noah. But instead of redoing the Julian calendar starting with the flood of Noah, the easiest way to figure this out without creating confusion is to just add 32 days to our current calendar, with the understanding that in order to line up with the Lord's astronomical, tropical solar calendar, we need to move backwards before we can move forward. So I will add 32 days to where we are right now, 77 years from the rebirth of Israel that I believe will herald the great and terrible day of the Lord that lasts 7 years and ushers in the Lord's 1,000-year kingdom on this earth. This calendar change might not seem logical, but if you think about it for a moment, you will understand that instead of removing 32 days from the start of the flood date, adding 32 incompleted days to the calendar does the same thing, as it will reconcile the Lord's tropical calendar and the Hebrew calendar at the end of the 77-year period from Israel becoming a nation in 1948 AD. So here is a chart with a timeline of where we are right now, adding 32 days in order to get us in sync with the Lord's tropical calendar that He decreed to time His appointed times right up to the end, with the understanding that the Lord has not revealed the start date for all this, which could result in a few more weeks of patiently waiting. Or perhaps, as I believe, He has already revealed it in 1948, as He wants us to be encouraged and ready as we patiently wait for the event that He has planned for His bride, the church, that will happen in 2025 AD. Remember that Daniel 9:24 through 26 was only to be fully revealed at the end as the Lord commanded, and we are definitely at the end. Are you ready, as at exactly the right time the redeemed are going to vanish? 77 years from when Israel was reborn. So let's wrap this up with the following 2 verses from the Bible. On the 2nd month, the 10th day, exactly 30 days from Tishri 10, that was the Day of Atonement, this is what happened. Listen to it in Genesis 7:1. Then the Lord said to Noah, "Enter the ark, you and all your household, for you alone I have seen to be righteous before me at this time." 7 days later, the flood begins. And in Genesis 7:11 we read, "In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on the same day all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened." And in Matthew 24:37 through 38 we read, "For the coming of the Son of Man will be like the days of Noah. For as in those days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark." And finally, in Hebrews 11:7, By faith, Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. So here's my question to you. Are you an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith? Faith in the atoning work of Messiah accomplished on the cross of Calvary? Maranatha. One final note. I did not have time in the video you just watched to reveal the miraculous connection between the flood of Noah and the beginning of the great and terrible day of the Lord. It is truly a Jubilee miracle. There is very little time left, but as a legacy to those left behind, with a special note to those that are children of Israel by birth, that will by God's mercy, through this time of tribulation, become sons by faith in the true Messiah, I have prepared a special video that I hope to have finished before the redeemed vanish from the earth. Brothers and sisters, pray for wisdom and understanding as the Lord Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh wants you to know Him, and with that relationship restored by His grace and your simple faith in our Messiah, He will grant you eternal life.